We've already had a lot of talk about the government so far today, and now we have someone who is representing the government joining us here, and certainly we appreciate him taking time out of what is, I would say, a very interesting time in the UK government the last week or so. Our next speaker, Matt Hancock, has been the Minister for Health, he's been the Minister for Digital, and he is one of probably the biggest enthusiasts, I would say, on crypto out of all of the members of Parliament. So he's going to tell us what he thinks government should be doing here. So please join me in welcoming Matt Hancock, and to interview him, we have David Brear from 11FS. Gentlemen. Are we here? Are we not here?
We're very much here, don't worry.
Okay.
We're just taking our time.
Okay.
We're busy nattering away backstage. So, hello everybody, how are you doing? My name is David Brear. We're going to have a really interesting chat about everything that the government can do with regards to cryptocurrency, with regards to blockchain and everything with that sense. We've had some really interesting conversations up here already this morning, taking various different angles on it, which is good. I was joking to Matt, I was trying not to be too controversial in that sense, but I realised that you're the MP for Suffolk and I'm a Norfolk boy through and through, so this might get ugly quite quickly in that sense. So, but we'll try and keep it clean in that sense, if that's all right.
It's a bit of local rivalry.
Yeah, it is.
Those who don't know East Anglia very well.
Does that make you an Ipswich fan then, or is that?
No, I'm a Newcastle fan actually. So I've been having a pretty good couple of weeks.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
All right, well,
back to the heady days of Kevin Keegan.
Indeed, yeah, it's going well suddenly, isn't it? Which is good. Right, so what we're going to talk a little bit about is, so what's the government's current stance on crypto? Because I guess we're going to get into, there's lots of different angles that we've sort of heard so far, but could you give us a bit of a view of where are we today? And we'll sort of get into the future a little bit later.
Well, the first thing I'll do is pick you up on something you said right at the start, which is what can the government do for us? I mean, I turned the question on its head. There's a revolution happening. This is going to change things for the better. The question of government is how do we allow that to happen, not what can we do to make it happen.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't mean that the government doesn't need to act and hasn't got a lot of work to do, but it should all be seen through the frame of how do we support this revolution to happen, not how do we decide, or I'm only in Parliament, not in government, but how do politicians should not be deciding where this is going. We should be facilitating it and making sure that it can happen here. So that's just a important framing point.
Sure.
Where they're up to is, I think there is now a serious realization that unless the UK authorities as a whole put in place a positive, liberal regime with clarity for building in the digital asset space, then we're going to lose out. And when I really, having been health secretary and having before that spent a lot of time on fintech, when I came out from being health secretary and looked around to see what was going on, I saw this extraordinary growth of in the digital asset space, and I could see that there'd been very little movement on the government side, but there were lots of other jurisdictions that were chasing and pushing, and now I think the penny has dropped that action is needed, and we need that clarity. But more important than clarity is we need a regime which encourages people to build, and crucially to build here. So I think that penny has dropped. Now, the problem is, it's like a two-piece slot machine. There's quite a lot that needs to happen from the penny dropping to the big overhang of opportunity falling off the bottom and ending up in the cash drawer. Well, that was quite a good metaphor.
That was very vivid.
I might use that again. But there was
the coin metaphor in there as well somewhere. I can't quite work it out.
It was even more beautiful than I thought. There's a huge amount of work to do. I know that they are on it, right? We know that they've been on the work for a UK stable coin, but actually the critical work there is how do you have a regime for a private UK stablecoin that everybody can trust, rather than, I think, than the government doing it itself. They know that they need to transpose the current rule book and have clarity about what the current rule book means in digital assets.
Yeah.
And they are writing that. But also, what is absolutely critical is that isn't good enough. Because if you impose the existing rule book and the overlap between UK and old EU rules that we no longer have to be aligned to, but are there, if you just put that whole edifice on top of the digital assets industry, this nascent disruptor, then it'll get flattened.
Yeah.
And so we need a new rule book. So in capital rules, in liquidity rules, in how you do KYC in the new world, in all of these things, we need a new, more liberal regime. Now, that last bit is the hardest to put in place. But there is at least at policy level, so in Treasury, there is the clear desire to do that. And I had been expecting something out of the government in the next couple of weeks, but it's been a turbulent time.
It might be delayed, for a few weeks.
Who knows? Well, the person who's driving it, John Glenn had done good work pointing in the right direction. Andrew Griffiths, the new minister there, wanted to pick that up and really push faster in a positive direction. My many interactions with him over the last 6 weeks have been very positive, and I know that the new Chancellor over the weekend, I mean, he's only been in post for a couple of days, but he did single out Fintech and the importance of getting of supporting finance to succeed in the world as one of the things on the growth agenda that he wants to continue from his predecessor, whereas clearly on the macroeconomic front, he's rightly taken a completely different course.
Yeah. So you talk about the rule book and needing a very different rule book. And earlier on, we've heard from Lex talking a little bit about that this is a new world. The old rules don't apply.
Yeah.
We've heard from Lawrence Wintermeyer earlier on, previously of Innovate Finance, big proponent for innovation, sort of post-financial crisis, and the competition mandate with the FCA.
Yeah.
I mean, what role do you think the regulator has to play in this then? Because I guess, the regulator regulates in traditional financial instruments.
Yeah.
This is something very different, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is that the approach of the regulator should be that they don't have a view unless there's something clearly going wrong.
Yeah.
Right? We should not have to go to the regulator to ask permission to innovate.
Sure.
That is a recipe for total stasis. And even the best regulator in the world couldn't possibly keep up with that.
Yeah.
So the first thing is a change from that essentially Napoleonic worldview to the classic common law British worldview, English law worldview, which is that you just get on with it, and we put in place it is right for the authorities to have a framework, right? We need to have things like rules on disclosure of conflicts and especially on clarity around advertising to retail customers.
Sure.
I passionately believe everybody should be allowed to play in this space and to buy whatever crypto they want. But the corollary of that is you need to have high quality information, and that needs a high level regulatory structure. But that doesn't mean that if I want to sell something, I should have to ask the FCA if I can. You shouldn't have to ask permission to innovate. The regime needs to be permissive and with rules of the road. So that's the first thing, which is a sort of attitudinal shift. Then there's a whole series of details within that. There's details on the operation of the regime. The FCA should not be stopping people from acting unless they have explicitly seen things that are against the rules. And since nobody knows what the rules are at the moment, that means that they should be very hands-off. We supporters of this, both in Parliament and in the industry, should actively be enthusiastic about the FCA allowing risk. And I am absolutely clear that if there is a failure, it is not the FCA's fault. In fact, if there are no failures, that is wrong of the FCA, right? Failures in growing industries, and especially in disruptive industries with brand new technology, are a good thing. They are a sign of a vibrancy of a market. And so, often within a regulator, you feel like there's a problem when there's been a failure. No, there is not a problem when there's been a failure. That is called free market, and we should applaud it. It's the only way we can build prosperity. And then you get down into some of the nuts and bolts. So, for instance, the tax rules. Right, so clearly a huge amount of digital assets are financial instruments, and to tax them as if they're physical property just again freezes them in aspic. Yeah. And there needs to be clarity on that. There needs to be clarity on capital rules. There is a broad latitude for interpretation of capital rules, which allows for the real-world reduction in risk to be reflected in the capital that a major institution can hold. What do I mean by that? I think one of the most interesting things that's going on is that crypto and digital asset technology allows for finance streaming instead of discrete payments. And I've thought about this until recently through the lens of blockchain reducing the transaction costs of settlement. Sure. Okay, and that is obviously a massive use case in international payments. It's less of a use case here in domestic payments because we have a real-time system, and I came here on the tube and I clicked my card on the tube, and that is a digital payment, and it's got zero cost to me, and we have that domestically, but we don't have it internationally. So I've been thinking through that frame. But actually, I've had my own penny drop moment, which is that what crypto allows for is the streaming of payments. And once you move to a world of streaming of payments, you can get many of the same scale of disruptions to existing activity that streaming has led to in other areas, right? If we were sitting here having this conference in an HMV store 20 years ago, right? And I'd said what we're going to be doing is streaming our music, not buying it in discrete chunks. Yeah. HMV might have thought, yeah, okay, that sounds a bit. Why would you do that? You need to have a stable internet connection, and surely that's never going to happen. What you really want is the physical thing, and people love buying a physical CD. You love and the little leaflet that comes with it, and putting it in the machine, right? And especially and vinyl as well. You love the. Turns out people don't love all of that stuff. What they love is high quality music playing in their ears, and streaming allowed for the complete disruption of that market, a massive improvement in consumers' opportunity, right? Yeah. And a total disruption of that market. Same is true, obviously, same is true in video and in the film industry, right across the board. We are entering an era of streaming of financial payments. Okay, I bet in 10 years' time, I will be paying my rent streamed, not in monthly installments, right? And that's just, I've just picked my electricity bill. Yeah. And they're just two sort of, the first two things that came to my head. Yeah. We are going to move to a world of streaming payments. Now, what does that mean in finance, of course? It means that there is far, far less counterparty risk, and as we've seen in the Web3 area, counterparty risk is one of the big risks, and that radically reduces capital costs because it genuinely reduces the risks of doing business in finance between two different financial institutions. It isn't a let's take more risk, it's actually we are reducing the inherent risk, and therefore you can reduce the amount of capital you need to hold. If you can reduce the amount of capital you need to hold, you can free it up to invest it in all sorts of other things, and the economy becomes stronger. Yeah. So this is the depth and the scale of the revolution that even those of us who are enthusiasts about it, simply can't imagine how big this is going to be. And the and I think the question was, what are the regulators up to? And the answer is they are just starting to scratch the surface, and the 2p is in the top of the machine, and it's about to go flat on that first layer. I don't know if any of you know what I'm talking about, these 2p slot machines, but I have a 9-year-old, and it's his favourite thing to do. And then it's going to push a load off, and then we're going to have a great big cascade of overhanging 2Ps that are going to drop down at the bottom.
Well, it sounds very community-driven in that sense, and you think the regulator needs to almost catch up with the community because, as we'll hear over the next couple of days, people are wanting to sort of spur that revolution, spur that change in that system. But how much do you think, therefore, is not everybody thinks like you in the government with regards to that view?
Not yet.
But do you think the old frameworks of thinking will therefore sort of inhibit the way in which that plays out? Because the regulator regulating to the old construct, the old competition, the old players in that system.
Yes, of course, there will be, they'll be stuck in the mud. Reactionaries everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we already know that. We've already seen them in action.
Yeah.
But the question they need to answer is, do we want this revolution to happen here or happen elsewhere?
Yeah.
There is no world in which this revolution does not happen. Now, I don't know exactly what the revolution is going to look like. And I'm the last person to paint it other than in broad brush in the way I see as my job, you tell me if I'm wrong, I see as my job as trying to win this big picture vision argument for where we want to go, and then, you lot do what the hell you like within those guardrails.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely no doubt that there's forces of reaction, usually out of lack of imagination and poor incentives, because there is an incentive on a regulator to be risk off, and I'm trying to give as much permission as I can with my voice and my role to persuade others to say the same, to give the regulators permission to be risk on. And then there's just the sort of treacle of changing stuff. But in the UK, we have an opportunity to really get ahead of this.
Yeah.
But the critical thing is, the question is not, will this happen? The question is, will this happen here?
Yeah. Well, it feels like we were very successful in the UK with that first round of Fintech, the infrastructure that was allowed to flourish here. This feels like the next wave of that. And to your point, why here versus other places? Because New York or Singapore, lots of different geos are sort of vying to be the epicenter of this, whether it's the magnet from talent's perspective or various different things. Why do you think people should be flocking to London, flocking to the UK to make it happen here?
Well, you're right that it's big competition. And you didn't mention the UAE and Dubai, another serious growing competitor. But the reason we have the opportunity is because we already have the depth of capability, of talent. London in particular has both a globally renowned finance and globally renowned tech hub.
Yep.
And so we have got that opportunity. We've got, I mentioned English law. I think it's really important. Most financial contracts in the world take place under English law. Of course, New York vies for that.
Mm-hmm.
And we can undoubtedly win that. We have an essentially cohesive regulatory system. It may not look like it when you just look at it, but when you look at anybody else's, it looks pretty cohesive, other than some of the dynamic new players. But, I could easily see a world where there are 2 or 3 global centers outside of the United States, or say 4 or 5 if you include New York, you include a Chinese center in a completely different structure where the likelihood of overlap is vanishingly small. And then, I can see 2 or 3 other centers outside of the 2 big blocks, where the UK, UAE, Switzerland, Singapore, and France are the ones who are vying for that. And we should be able to wipe the floor with the others because of the legacy assets that we have.
Yeah.
But we will not do that unless we can get tomorrow's systems right, as well as we can't rely on the past. But the thing is, we do have some really good examples of where this has worked. Yeah, not just the invention of central banking in 1694, but throughout the ages, when the gold market was the hot thing in the 19th century, the Eurobond market in the 80s, swaps and the derivative markets in the later 80s, the gilt repo market, which was built in and essentially government bond repo markets were built here in the 90s, and then the wave of fintech in the early 2010s when the FCA was really risk on, and so we've got that history to help us to win the argument for the next stage of this. And I think we are winning the argument at the top layer, but we've just got to do the work to make it actually deliver.
Yeah. So much of that success was down to the government, the FCA, the regulators, the Bank of England, collaborating in that sense.
Working with industry.
Absolutely, and working with new competitors, working with old players in the market.
Yeah.
How fundamental do you see that to
It's absolutely critical. It's got to be open book. It's absolutely critical that, that people in this room should be invited in to help write that rule book. One of the good things that's happening at the moment is following the FCA sprints earlier in the year. Treasury are now inviting market players in. There was a roundtable a fortnight ago. There's another one next week, and so people are being invited in.
Yeah.
You can't invite everybody in, and you wouldn't. The nature of a high quality market is there's loads of disparate players. It's not a conglomerated market, and that is an emphatically good thing. Right?
Absolutely.
You can't just phone up the 4 big players. But nevertheless, you need to have a selection. You called it a community earlier, and a high quality market is a community where you have competition, but and sometimes that competition can be quite fierce, but it's within an overall collegiate structure where we're building something together.
And all to move the community forward in that sense, in terms of where we're going. I mean, there are sort of some fundamental building blocks in this sense. We talked a little bit about ID in the past. Actually, this is something that I think is sort of held fintech back, but arguably in this next wave could be an advantage if we look at that. Obviously, UK identity schemes have been quite difficult to implement in the past, but do you think this looks like an opportunity to look at that again?
I think there's definitely an opportunity to have a high quality consent-based digital ID scheme. I was responsible in government for the Verify project for a while, and so I have the scars on my back of how difficult this can be. My overall view on that project, for those of you who know about it, is that we overcomplicated it. People are willing to have an ID, a digital ID, if they consent to it. I wouldn't want to make it universal,
sure,
because then you get into the autocratic space, which I don't want. But people are willing to go down that route if it improves their lives. My proof point of this is the digital, the biometric passport, right? How many people, if I asked you in the abstract, will want to give up your sensitive biometric data to one of the most restrictive parts of the state, right? The Home Office, right? Would you do it? And most people would, if you ask the question that way, most people are a bit sniffy about it, for perfectly reasonable reasons. Then if I say, but it will shorten your trip through Heathrow by 5 minutes because you'll get your biometric passport and be able to go through the e-gates, 98% of people with passports have signed up.
Yeah.
Right? So people are up for a system so long as it works for them, and there's decent assurances with high levels of transparency about how the system operates. And frankly, anybody who uses Apple ID is already down that route, except that we've trusted an American massive company instead of the state.
Yeah.
All of that could be simplified using high quality, decentralized technology. And I think we shouldn't be squeamish about it, so long as it's consent based and that you don't have to, but that you can. Yeah. Then let's go there. I mean, look at Andar in India, absolutely massive success. Started out completely voluntary, then it moved to the sort of voluntary that your life is actually rather difficult to live if you're not in it. But nevertheless, it is still technically voluntary. You could choose to be a monk, and some people in India do.
Yeah.
And not sign up for it.
Well,
these are the sorts of solutions that are now available that just weren't available 10 years ago when we started on the Verify project.
Yeah, it's never about the technology, it's sort of about the use cases, isn't it, in that sense? If you make the benefit to the customer significant enough, they will take that leap, they'll engage with it in that sense. So, I mean, look, we've talked a lot about, where we are, the opportunities in that space, but I guess what should the government do, for or with crypto? Is this, back to your point, is this, really does the government have a significant place in the community in that sense? They should be engaging even more than they are.
So what should the government do? Crikey. Well, the first thing they need to do is stabilize the macroeconomy and the markets, and that is like, it doesn't matter whether you're into DeFi or TradFi, we need that. And
stability would be good. For
the last 24 hours has been good for that. The next thing that we need to do, that the government needs to do, is to put in place the plan for a clear direction of travel to build the ecosystem, right? And I use that as shorthand for a whole series of things that need to happen underneath, because there isn't one thing that the government can do. It needs to set in place the right attitude, which is the government will not drive this, but will allow it to be driven by those who are innovating. Take the right regulatory attitude, which is get on with it and don't ask permission, just build, and so long as you're within broad guide rails, that's fine. Third, set out what those guide rails are in the world of digital assets, which is about this transposition of the existing rule book. Fourth, simplify that rule book to make sure that this is the place that you want to do business. And what do I mean by saying that this is the place you want to do business? I do not mean that we should have a total free-for-all and everything that might happen in every jurisdiction is encouraged to happen here. Mm-hmm. If we think about a sort of 80-20 principle, that you want 80% of the market, and if the 20% that is the most radical, including some of the elements that are unappealing, would choose not to come here and base themselves in very small offshore jurisdictions, fine. But you want the 80% of the mass market, you want it to be here. And so we need to move from positive language and smoke signals through to regulatory positive attitude, clarity on the rule book, and then a new positive, liberal, permissive rule book so that all of you can build.
It's exciting. I mean, you've heard it here first, guys. Go from positive intent to you guys get on and build it, which is a real mandate to go out there and get on with it and actually move the industry forward. So on that note, we are going to have to wrap up, though. So ladies and gentlemen, give Matt Hancock a big round of applause. Thanks so much. That was awesome. Thank you.
Great stuff.
All right.